Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you could join us for this July Lunch and Learn webinar. Some people call it a brown bag. I like that better. I wish I branded it brown bag right from the beginning. I like that one better. But I'm glad you guys are here for such an important topic um, that we have two wonderful speakers, Hannah Larondo and Jim Thompson. Did I get that right, Hannah? Yeah, I get that right. Two fantastic guests are with us today. Jim Thompson is Associate Director for Workforce Partnerships at the Cape Cod Community College of Rhode Island. And Hannah is Co-founder Director of Employer Development at More Than Our Worst. And today they're talking about fair chance hiring, myths and opportunities. And we had a wonderful conversation about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer, about what this topic really means to us as employers and people that are interested in helping people have better lives. I'm the program director for Recovery Friendly Workplace, and I work for the state. I work at Buddha, what people call Buddha, BHDDH. My program engages with employers all over Rhode Island to develop a workplace culture that is supportive of people in recovery or struggling with substance abuse and or mental health. So if you are an employer here, you're not yet a recovery friendly workplace, and you'd like to work with us, we'd love to work with you. As when I asked Hannah to give me a quick write-up of what this is about, she wrote something that I thought was beautiful. We are having historic labor shortages in the U.S. right now. And at the same time, with these shortages, there are 77 million Americans with criminal records who are suffering from unemployment or underemployment. This is what the topic is all about today. So I'm going to let Hannah and Jim get going on this and not take up any more time. I'm glad to see everybody here. Welcome, Megan. I think you're the last person that came in the door. I think you're out in New York, Megan, right? Somewhere. Yeah, okay. Welcome, everybody, and I'll turn it over to Jim and Hannah.
Thanks so much, Jeff. It's really a pleasure to be here with everyone, and we won't spend a lot of time getting into Jim and I's backgrounds because I know we all want to get into the meat of the work, but or excuse me, the content. But I'll just say again, I'm Hannah Larondo. I'm with More Than Our Worst. And I am one of the co-founders of our organization, but I also started in this work as the employer. So as we were waiting for people to trickle in, I saw that there's a really great diversity of employers, community-based organizations, different types of holistic support systems. And so I've been in your shoes. I've been with you. It was my experience as an employer that pushed me on the road to found More Than Our Worst and help people not make the mistakes that I did in the past and build stronger practices for hiring this talent pool. Jim, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and what you do at CCRI with Polaris MEP?
Yeah. So thanks, Hannah, and for everybody for showing up. It is an important topic that we've been working on for a while. Just my background, as Jeff mentioned, Associate Director at CCRI, involved with advanced manufacturing programs here on the workforce partnership side of the college. We started a program called the Fast Track to CNC Manufacturing 7 years ago. And we've introduced that program into the women's facility at the ACI in 2022. And that's kind of why I'm here. We're also hopefully introducing some other programs at advanced manufacturing programs at men's minimum and medium security soon as well. So with that, I'll let you get started, Hannah.
Thanks so much, Jim. And I got the opportunity to see that program inside at ACI, and it's really phenomenal. I'm looking forward to Jim sharing more of a case study around it later. But let's get going. We are trying to get through a lot of topics today in a relatively short amount of time, but there is a kind of robust period of Q&A at the end. Jeff's going to help us keep track of your questions, and we'll try and get through the kind of lecture portion, presentation portion of the content, and then have a discussion. So what we're going to do today is, again, I've been doing this work. I started as the employer, and I've been supporting businesses in their fair chance hiring initiatives for about 10 years now, a little over maybe. The COVID years get kind of blurry now. And in every instance, there's been kind of three common assumptions that employers come up against over and over again that is a barrier to them really getting started with hiring this this talent pool. The first one is that this is a small population and therefore not worth a focused initiative. That comes up a lot, even with the advancements in us kind of understanding the scale of the issue of incarceration in the US. The kind of idea that there are bigger fish to fry is very common in these conversations with employers. The second is that this talent pool is underskilled and won't be able to keep up, that this is almost a charitable initiative, not a strategic business one. And the third, the one that I think really is in the back of a lot of people's minds that we need to get better and more courageous about just naming and facing, is the idea that this talent pool might be dangerous and could be a liability to your workplace, right? So let's jump in with the first myth that we're going to bust today, that this talent pool is small in number and not worth a focus initiative. Right off the bat, statistically, it's simply untrue. This is an astronomical number of people. So like Jeff was kind of saying as we were trickling in, there are 77 million people in the US who have a criminal record. If you push that kind of one ripple effect out and include everyone who has a direct family member or a person in their household who's affected by the criminal legal system, that bumps that number up to 115 million people, which is about a third of the US workforce. So there's a huge amount of people who are suffering from this legal status, and kind of the effects that that has on your access to housing, employment, trauma and healing that can happen, that can be needed after a period of incarceration, et cetera. And all of these people are desperate for work. So thinking about the pure scale of the issue, this is a lot of people who want jobs, who don't have jobs, which leads to both kind of a societal and ethical problem, a public safety problem. People are going to do what they have to do to live. And if they can't get legitimate employment, they're going to do something else. And all of these things have a business solution, which is where we come in, right? The second thing, if we're thinking about, okay, so there are a lot of people, right? This is a bigger problem maybe than I thought, but I really am focused on other marginalized identities right now. That's what I hear a lot too. I'd love to, but we're really focused on gender parity. We're really focused on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We're really focused on, insert X diversity initiative. And we don't, maybe once we solve for that, we can focus on your fair chance talent. That's another thing I hear a lot in the room. Fair chance hiring really strategically can and should be your ground zero for any diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that your employers are going after. And that's because if we look at the demographics of historically marginalized identities that most employers are trying to hire, if we look at Black and brown people, increasingly women, the LGBTQ population, et cetera, this is a mirror image of who gets caught up in the criminal legal system. So this data is from an organization that I worked for, who our sole purpose at the time was to really take in folks who had been released within the past 5 years, give them a year of housing support and skills development, and push them into meaningful employment. The only qualifier, the only thing we looked for was released within the past 5 years. And this is the naturally occurring demographic data of that population. When I was an employer, I was on an HR team. I can't tell you how hard we worked to try and get anywhere near 50% gender parity, and we did not come close, right? Having 71% ethnic diversity based on that one metric of being released within the past 5 years is also something that employers are doing astronomical amounts of programming to achieve. And having 35% be Black is also incredibly effective in terms of what employers are trying to do to diversify their populations. And we also saw that about 14% were LGBTQ. So scale of the issue, astronomical problem that needs a business solution. If you start with fair chance talent, all of your other diversity initiatives are naturally going to improve, right? So the focused initiative piece, this is not charitable, it's strategic, right? The last thing we want to think about is that there are potential legal ramifications for not doing this well. I think one of the biggest kind of sub-myths within this larger myth is the idea that there are no protections for talent with records. There are just as many protections as there are barriers. And oftentimes, employers, while well meaning, are actually kind of operating in a hiring function that's not exactly compliant. In the state of Rhode Island, they ban the box was implemented in 2013. So you can't ask on an application if someone's been convicted of a felony. But there's actually more going on in the state of Rhode Island as well. There was a Fair Employment Practices Act that was passed, and that act protects against employment discrimination based on several factors, including criminal records, right? Later in this presentation, we're going to talk more about what federal guidelines recommend and how we can support employers in making sure that they're being compliant in their hiring practices. But the point of these 3 data points before we shift into the next myth is that if we're thinking about this talent pool as being small in number and not worth a focused initiative, we really have very contradictory data to that myth, right? This is a huge population that's going to be one of your most strategic initiatives that you can take on, and there are some potential legal consequences for not doing this well. This is an unavoidable population as we're looking at the future of work and its workforce. That workforce has a criminal record, at least a third, right? So how do we build a more sophisticated practice, right? The next myth that we see a lot is that this talent pool is underskilled and won't be able to keep up. So again, this is kind of this idea that this would be a nice thing to do societally, but kind of charitable, and that you have to be in a position in your business to be able to kind of take on someone to ramp up. Not that sometimes the best person for the job happens to have a criminal record. So again, kind of starting at the national scale, the Society for Human Resource Management, we call them SHRM, has done national level research on this and really found the total opposite again. So in their research, SHRM has found that 85% of HR professionals and 81% of business leaders believe workers with criminal records perform just as well or better. That was certainly my experience when I was the employer in their jobs compared to workers without criminal records. And 81% of HR professionals say that the quality of hire for those records is about the same. So again, if we're looking at it kind of broadly and statistically across the nation, this is simply untrue. This is a highly skilled workforce who's ready to work, who are being kind of pushed out of these jobs in a time of historic labor shortages. So giving you a little bit of background context, but I know for this group, it's going to be more meaningful to get an on-the-ground example, and I want to pass it over to Jim to talk about the really incredible work that CCRI and Polaris MEP have been doing to give an idea of what this skilled talent pool can look like in your real regional and local context. So Jim, feel free to take it away. And when you want me to advance the slide, just holler and I'll do so.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Always great information and impactful. I'm always amazed to see that there's 77 million people that are looking for work that are justice impacted. So I just want to share with you a few things. You see up there, CCRI and Polaris MEP. Polaris MEP is a statewide organization, a nonprofit that works with manufacturers throughout the state of Rhode Island. There's a, not by the same name, but there's an organization similar to Polaris MEP in each state working strictly with manufacturers. And we've been involved with them since the inception of the program, as I mentioned, which was in 2017, the community-based program here at CCRI, which has been at the ACI, specifically at the women's facility since 2022. So we have the program, and Polaris certainly has relationships with a number of manufacturers in the state. One that I want to bring to your attention is one with a multinational based out of Bristol, Rhode Island, that we worked with for a number of years. And Polaris is really more of the employer-facing component to the program, CCRI does the training, the skills training for the program again, which is called the Fast Track to CNC Manufacturing, teaching people to become machinists, CNC machinists, tool makers, quality control people working in manufacturing in general. So, they went to a number of manufacturers, but particularly this one, and mentioned the program and how receptive they would be to it. And they were very receptive. We had a champion within that organization that really ran with this. And being a publicly traded company, obviously they can't operate in a vacuum. They had to run this by corporate. And there was already fair chance hiring practices in place there, but the program really helped to launch that in a more proactive way. And we have a few great success stories there where they have employed some of the people that went through the training at the women's facility. So just one thing I want to mention there is, so the program has been very successful. Of all of the people that have been in the program, this is our 4th cohort. We'll finish at the end of this month. There's been 100% completion, and 70% of the people that are eligible for placement have been placed. So, yeah. So can you just go to the next one, Hannah, for me? The next slide, please. Thank you. Conversely, this is kind of the opposite end of the example that I just presented. It's a very small design-based company that we have a relationship with, and that they've employed people through our program before. And sort of the impetus for this arrangement was more the skill set that they were looking for was rather unique. They were looking for somebody that was able to do design work, but also roll up their sleeves and actually be the maker that is making the parts. So they could do design work, but they could also do the machining. They're in the East Bay, so they wanted somebody that was local. And really the best candidate for that was a woman that was in the program and was about to be released. She was on work release, so she was able to do an internship there before eventually being placed with the organization. So really the driving factor there was, yes, they wanted to get involved with fair chance hiring, certainly, but it was really more of the skill set of this particular individual, the uniqueness that was the driver, and allowed them to go ahead and hire somebody that had the right skills, who happened to be also justice impacted. So
yeah, and I think that just to chime in really quickly,
sure.
I think that part of our strategy and really approach to this work is finding the best person for the job, regardless of their criminal history. And in both of those examples, seeing that can happen on a scale of giant, multinational corporation down to mom and pop shop, and that if we're counting out this talent pool, you're really missing out on top talent opportunities. I just wanted to emphasize what you shared. So thank you for that. And I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. A very excellent point. Yeah. So, and then we wanted to share a few other success stories, involved in the program, women that have gone through the program. One that is really clean, and how we wish all of the case studies were. It was a woman who was again on work release. She did her internship component of the program with what we call a contract manufacturer in Cranston, Rhode Island, sort of a mid-sized organization, about 600 people. I think they employ almost 200 people in Rhode Island, and they have a few other locations in the Midwest, and also one in Connecticut. So she had worked there, done an internship. They really liked the work that she did, and they did offer her a position. At that time, she was continuing her education and taking a computer-aided design course. And she was an excellent student. I think she got a 4.0 in the program, but she was studying during lunch breaks and other breaks. And some of the engineers noticed that it was for a computer-aided design application that they actually use on the shop floor. So one thing led to another, and she was hired by the engineering department there because of her skills, and is still there 2+ years later, with promotions, and also I think making roughly 30% more than what she started at that organization just 2+ years ago. So as Hannah mentioned, the skills were there. The fact that she was justice impacted was not really an issue for them, thankfully. So, and then the other training success story is, I don't want to say more typical, but there was a bump in the road, which is often the case, and really a great story of perseverance. The woman there went through the program, finished the program, got placed just weeks after reentry. Everything was in place, so she was doing really great. She was continuing her education in phase 2 of the program down in Warwick, and she had a misstep along the way. Unfortunately, it was a parole violation, and she was reincarcerated for a short period of time, only 3 months or so. Unfortunately, her position, they could not hold their position for her. So upon reentry back in after that 3-month stint, she was able to also land at a different company. And her manager, ironically, is the woman who was the initial person that went through this program as a pilot on a work release basis. So so that was a good story as well, where she did persevere, and unfortunately did leave that $25 plus an hour position, but did land. So it is really a nice story in the end. So
thank you,
that,
Jim.
Hannah?
Yeah, I think that it's important, especially for people in this work, to tell the stories of successes and bumps in the road. We also, when I was the employer, had different kind of instances of reincarceration. And I think especially hosting this brown bag with recovery-friendly workplaces, often those parole violations can be recovery related. So thinking through how we can work together to help create those safety nets and give people opportunities. So I know we want to transition into Q&A in about 10 minutes, and I think this next section will probably take less than that, but thank you, Jim, for that case study. And again, just continually impressed with what you've accomplished with CCRI and Polaris MEP. So our
Thank you.
last myth that we're going to bust today is the idea that this talent pool is dangerous and will be a liability. I think whether it's being said out loud or not, that's often kind of the thought in the back of the head that pushes forward these kind of excuses, or, oh, we'd love to, but we can't, or da-da-da. And so let's just talk about it soberly, right? And so if we're going to talk about it soberly, I think the first thing we need to understand is that stigma is real. It exists. There is nothing we can really do to totally eradicate it from ourselves or our hiring practices. What we can do is manage it and understand it. You know, we're hit with tons of messaging from sensationalized news, worst case scenario hypotheticals, Batman movies, you name it. A lot of times the prison population is pushed so far out of our own communities that they become a kind of other that we don't understand, and it can create a lot of fear. And we'll talk again kind of further along that there are also instances of harm that do occur and real ways that we do have to manage real versus imagined risk, right? And so again, to kind of start in facing the stigma piece, there was this great study by UCLA in 2020 that our consultants actually contributed to, that showed that stigma is one of the leading barriers to employment for talent with records. These core findings revealed 4 core instances of this. I'll go through 2 of them and then we'll move on. But the first one is that in hiring decisions, employers view criminal records more negatively than other evidence of the same illegal conduct. Excuse me. For example, if Jim and I are applying to work at one of your organizations, you've done some background on us both, we're both qualified, Jim has a marijuana conviction, and you saw on my social media account that maybe I smoke marijuana, you're actually going to penalize Jim more for the conviction, even though there's evidence that I'm doing the same thing, right? So those are one of the ways that the stigma creeps in. The second is that employers expect applicants with criminal records to engage in many undesirable behaviors on the job, even ones unrelated to the conduct indicated by the record. I think I see this the most. The example that comes to mind for me is I was working with a big staffing agency. We were doing a individualized assessment clinic to help them learn how to read a background check effectively and conduct a risk-based assessment. And in this example, we had someone with a conviction up, and the CEO of this organization said, well, I'd love to give this guy a chance, but I can't risk him coming in and shooting up the place. 1, indelicate, and 2, there was no evidence of armed assault in this person's background whatsoever. So the worst case hypothetical bubbled into something that then got framed as a legitimate risk and affected a hypothetical hiring situation. So those are the types of things that can also happen in these hiring decisions and employment spaces. The next 2 are pretty straightforward. If you have questions, just hold them and we'll move to the Q&A and we can address them. But just want to emphasize that this stigma point is affecting hiring decisions, and we need to have a sophisticated way to sift through stigma and actually be able to assess where is there risk. And sometimes there is risk. We don't want to be naive about this or idealistic. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has created a framework to help employers assess that risk. That's a federal level recommendation to do a nature time nature test. So what a nature time nature test does is it says take the nature of the conviction, the time that has passed, the nature of the role. So what are you hiring for? The time that has passed, has it been a year or 10 since the conviction? And then the nature of the conviction. And if all of those are deeply relevant, that might spell out a risk that would require that you pass on this candidate. But if it is not relevant, then even if you don't feel good about it, it's not actually a legitimate reason not to hire this person. So for example, let's say Jim owns a truck driving company and I'm applying as a driver. Jim runs my record and I have 2 DUIs in the past 5 years. That is a legitimate risk, right? My conviction is directly related to the role and it has not been a long time. Jim absolutely should not hire me as a truck driver. But Jim might say, hey, you know what? We really like your energy. You fit in well with the team. You seem like you have a lot of skill sets. Driving, this is not going to work out. Maybe in a couple years if we see that you don't have any repeat offenses, but there's actually a receptionist position open. Could we funnel you into that? That has nothing to do with my conviction, right? So that pass-fail approach to background screening is not recommended on the federal level. On the federal level, they do not recommend blanket bans, even on violent offenses. And this process, this nature time nature test, can help you kind of sift through, okay, is this stigma? Am I having kind of a moralistic reaction around your conviction? Is this kind of like cropping up some fears that I have? Or is this a legitimate thing that we need to actually assess is not viable for the role that we have in place? So those practices exist, and when they're used well, they can be really effective. So again, we want to make sure that we understand that stigma's in the room, that we have practices like the nature time nature test that are going to keep you compliant and help you manage what else might be coming up in the hiring decision. And there are also going to be times when, as employers, we're going to be faced with tough cases. We're really going to be faced with the reality that sometimes people are in conditions where they cause really severe harm. And what do we do then, right? How do we move forward as business people and employers, and also societally as human beings? And how do we really ground ourselves in the fact that we're all more than the worst thing that we've ever done, even if the thing that we've done is really, really terrible? So I hired Zach. I was part of the hiring team that hired Zach, and actually Megan Goddard, who's on the line, was with me at the time when we hired Zach. It's really good to see you here. Zach came to us through a community-based organization. We knew that he had a record. He had participated in coding classes inside, and he went through a very, very rigorous interview process with a tech company, and he passed with flying colors. The team was so excited to hire him. They had no idea about his record because we kind of had that confidentiality barrier. And so when we gave him a conditional offer and ran the background check, we found that he had a homicide in his past. So this was something that we really had to take quite seriously. And I like this story because it kind of takes us to what's the worst thing that we are worried about dealing with. And so we did a very, very rigorous nature test. So we looked at the conviction. We're like, okay, we are working with homicide here. This is something that happened in his youth. It's been almost 20 years since this occurred. And then we looked at his evidence of rehabilitation. He brought us a stack. The folder was truly about this thick of everything he had done inside in terms of his own trauma and healing, advancing himself through courses. And he had so much educational background while he was inside. And then just having a conversation with him and talking about kind of his journey and how he's doing, and really getting a human to human perspective, after he had been, suitable, deemed suitable for release, and is now trying to get his life on with. And so we assessed that Zach was not a risk, even though it was a violent felony. And I'm happy to say that he's been with the organization for over 5 years. And as you can see, Zach is a vocal champion for this work now. He's a top performer. He's been promoted a few times, and he speaks really beautifully and eloquently about his own story. So there are ways that we can and must engage with this population, really, regardless of what the conviction is. We're not going far enough if we're saying, okay, we can solve for this, but only nonviolent offenses. These folks are coming out, they're doing the work, they're transforming their conditions to ensure that harm doesn't happen again. And we have to be able to bring people back into the fold of society in a meaningful way. And employment is one of the first places where that has to happen for people to really move on with their lives. So we're going to transition into the Q&A. Just in this last minute, I like to kind of leave people with a few things to do. There's a lot of ways to get started on deeper implementation practices, but if you just want a couple things that you can take to your departments today, these are a few. So first, shine a light on your background check process. Is there still a, felony conviction box on your applications? Are you running background checks? If so, maybe consider why. And if you are running them, are you really making sure that you're grounding to the nature of the role and what convictions then are deeply correlated, and doing that work? The second thing you can do is you can partner with a sourcing and training partner like CCRI and Polaris MEP. When I was the employer, I simply could not have done this successfully without my sourcing partners. That is really, really important to your practice. And then third, update your job descriptions and equal employment statements to flag to this population that they are welcome and wanted, right? So think about how you can have your job descriptions be based around skills, not the golden resume, and maybe add that you're open to hiring people with criminal records in your equal employment statement. So those are just a couple things that you can do to get started. And thank you again for the time. I'm excited to open up and hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much, Hannah and Jim. Great presentation. When you showed the picture of Zach, I thought it was Derek Jeter. I was like, wait a second, he has a criminal background? I didn't know that. All right, so we're going to open up the meeting now for questions. I just ask you to raise your hand, and I will call on you and open up the floor. Thank you very much, everybody. Oliver, one thing that Oliver mentioned. Do you want to mention this, Oliver, in the chat, what you said?
Yeah, so you know, in my role as the employment coach, I do a lot of applications with our guests here at Amos House. And I do see still a lot of companies asking that question, whether they have a criminal background on their application. I did try to report a company once. And so I initially called the Department of Labor and they told me it was a human rights issue regarding discrimination. So I reached out to the Human Rights Commission here in Providence and left several messages and nothing really came of that. Nobody really responded back to me. I do have, I don't know if it'll work. I do have a screenshot of, it doesn't look like I can do, oh, I can do a screenshot. Let me see if I can. No, I don't think I can do it on my computer.
I think we can jump in from there, honestly, Oliver, because I think what you're describing, and again, in thinking through what are the various barriers to employment for this population, stigma is such a huge driver that it actually creates this layer of assumption around what is and isn't okay for employers to do, regardless of if it's legal or not. And part of the issue is that it's difficult to enforce, right? So I think for us as supporters of this work, it's important to really be straightforward and direct, that if you see that, even if you know the employer, say, hey, did you know that Rhode Island is a ban the box state? Did you know that it actually has this additional ordinance and this is not compliant? And so we really, really, really not only recommend, but legally you are required to take this box off. And do you have a practice for reviewing records on the back end? We can help you with that, right? I think the enforcement piece is a challenge that we collectively need to solve for, but we can educate employers along the way. We want to kind of posture ourselves as supportive versus an enforcement arm, right? So help guide and teach the employers about where they're being uncompliant, where they might not realize it, right? And I think you can have those really direct conversations, especially if you're working with someone like Amos House, where you have such deep relationships with these employers, just being confident in doing that work. And I think a lot of times, because there is so much struggle and stigma around this population, we can get a little precious with employers, right? We don't want to ruffle their feathers, even if they're acting outside of the law. And so we just need to be kind of confident and grounded in our own initiatives to have a real partnership and push with people. But it can be hard. It can definitely be very hard to enforce.
That's great advice, that approach.
Yeah. If could I add to that, because that is certainly a wonderful approach. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about, because at our organization here in Amos House, I think the approach, because of the guests that we serve, the population we serve, a majority of the individuals are justice impacted, mental health, substance use. Many of the individuals we work with. So, our whole population and, a large percentage of our staff are individuals who are justice involved, substance use, mental health issues, and the like. So when the greater population approaching other employers, when I have to advocate for different guests that I'm working with, to your point, the relationship that we're trying to establish with those employers, and is the understanding is that I guess the light that I try to put it in is that the employer, this is an opportunity for the employer because this individual is a valuable human being, and you put the data up that most situations where criminal records are involved, the employees perform in better situations. They have a true desire to succeed. In some ways, it's unfortunate that we fail, because I'm a person directly impacted by the criminal justice system, that I feel like, I can't let this employer down. I can't let my family down. I can't, because I have all of these barriers against me. So when I do speak to potential employers, I try to explain to them and try to bring the humanity of the person that I'm advocating for. Hey, this individual, he's seeking to succeed, and your company is going to benefit if we look at this human being as a human being, and let's try to, of course, we got to take his criminal record into consideration, but not to the extent where it overrides rational thought. You know what I mean? And I think that's the point that we're all trying to make. And I really agree. Like, it's the human being. We have to treat individuals as humans before we start looking at the things they've done, because those are just things that we've done. They're not who we are as people,
Yeah, couldn't agree more and appreciate that color. And I think looking at the human being, but also looking at the skills, like Jim pointed out, to a certain degree, again, we want to balance risk assessment and making sure that we have a very sophisticated practice. But I guess the delicate balance that I think for us to strike is, yes, of course, we want to look at people as a whole human being. Jeff kind of opened up this space talking about what we need in the workplace to really foster a sense of belonging and care, and we care about people as an individual. But also, if I'm qualified for the job and I don't pose a risk, it's whatever you feel about that conviction is not really our business. It's not our right to be another judge and jury in this person's life. If they have the skills, give them the job, and so having those training opportunities and hiring practices that highlight the skills is important as well. Yeah, Megan.
Great.
Oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead. You want to add something?
Well, I wanted to also add, Amico, that you certainly have to be tactful, I think, in certain conversations that you have with employers, right? Because, they're a resource to you. But I do think being direct and being honest with them is also helpful. I was a former principal with a manufacturing company, and when Hannah brought it up, there is some exposure, that there's no difference in certain circumstances for denying that person employment because they have a record versus because they're short. It is a form of, or can be a form of discrimination that that employers, again, tactfully, should be aware of that.
I really appreciate this conversation, and Hannah, it's so good to see you again. I have a question around the nature time nature test, because I've found that it can be a little bit vague when it comes to implementation of the nature time nature test. Sometimes, like the example you gave was such a good one on when it's very clear, like a DUI and a driving job, a school bus driver, whatever it is. But what I've found to be a little harder to determine are charges like theft. A lot of employers reject people for theft crimes. And when having conversations with them about why that is, and why they reject people across the board in all positions at their company for theft crimes, they put it into this category of crimes of dishonesty. And they're like, there's things that they could be stealing anywhere in the company, whether it's a manufacturing job or a corporate job at the office. And so I'd be curious to hear if you have any strategies on how to respond to an employer that has practices like that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Great example. And I think it speaks to one of those findings from the UCLA study. It's that hypothetical worst case scenario where you stole something once in some context that I don't understand. So you are a dishonest thief, and that is legitimate, right? And that's not legitimate. And I think, of course, there are like nuanced conversations that can happen around getting really, really, really concrete in your kind of assessments of the nature of the role and what applies. It can also be something where maybe that's something that comes up on the background check that you haven't filtered out that you just want to review, but it shouldn't be a clear kind of blanket ban. And also, I think if we look practically and historically and at all of the data surrounding risk, the rise of background screening has been very much a function of HR professionalism, not true risk, right? So it's actually hasn't always been the case that we run background checks on every single job. That is a fundamentally new concept. It used to be for very, very high ranking positions like judges, people with a great deal of power. And so my honest opinion and approach is that the we should think about how much information we want to pull on people that can create these opportunities for nuance and stigma and bias and difficult what if situations that take us away from the skills that people have, putting them in the position and trusting that this is going to work out. Right. Again, when I was in the employer, I was on the HR team. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of HR issues every year, and none of them were with my talent pool. Having a conviction history does not mean that you are the only person who's capable of causing harm, right? We deal with workplace issues all the time. How many people with Ivy League backgrounds working in tech companies are taking, I don't know, office supplies, right? we don't fault them for that. So I think honestly, yes, there's a way for you to get really nuanced and concrete, but my question would be like, why are we actually nitpicking this? Why don't we just put them in the job? What was the benefit of knowing this information? And let's deal with it if something happens. And 9 times out of 10, nothing's going to happen. Or it's going to happen with your person who doesn't have a criminal record, and you're going to have to deal with it in the same way as well.
Have you had much success in asking the employer directly? I would be tempted myself to do this and just say, what's the real fear here? What's the real fear here for you as an individual? Because you're speaking perhaps to the person that has the power to shift the scales. I would be tempted, and my dad would tell me that I don't have any tact. I'm too direct. Where I would just look somebody in the eye and say, what's the real issue going on here? You've done this wonderful dance of trying to convince me of the risk, but I get a feeling that the fear is in you, not in the policy. And I'm tempted to confront people often like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It's definitely my style. Your dad might say I'm too direct as well. But I do think we need to get better at being direct and really digging into these. And I think things like the nature time nature test can help. Having various hiring practices can help. Waiting for a conditional offer, which is legally required in the state of Rhode Island, can help. I think also practically, when I was the employer, we had an individualized assessment committee. So it wasn't down to one person. There was 4 to 5 people who did the assessment together. So that way, it's not all of this power in one person's perspective, and who knows what's behind that fear, who knows what happened to them in the past, or what stigmas they hold, or what fears they might hold. And you really have a committee of trusted people who are bringing different perspectives. So the recommendation would be, ideally, you're on that committee so that you can push back, right? And say, okay, well, I'm not really getting this. I don't see the risk. What do other people think? And you can have a more robust set of opinions, which is one healthy way to kind of like shake loose the stigma, is just having a variety of perspectives. You don't want that committee to get too big. You don't want it to be too tiny. But I find having a couple people, we did it with, it was the head of people, head of legal, head of cybersecurity, and myself were the committee. If there was ever a kind of more serious charge, like in Zach's case, we would pull in the CEO and we'd have a really robust discussion and dialogue, and that can help kind of shake things loose and like put a mirror up to your peers and say, no one else thinks that this is a problem, so why don't you kind of like look internally and see where that's coming from you.
I wonder if there's some value in rotating those people as well, because I feel like over time that scoring group or that applicant review group would get too comfortable with each other and perhaps start aligning their values, I would just think that group would perhaps bond in a way that would not necessarily always be healthy.
Perhaps, yeah. I think in my time we didn't rotate, but we had very different perspectives. So we did not ever come to a place of easy agreement. But yeah, definitely healthy to have those rotations and or at least be thinking through what could possibly kind of undermine the integrity of the process for sure.
It's 12:56, and I want to take the time to thank Jim and Hannah for their wonderful work. And I know this is certainly not even close to a thorough examination of the issue. If people want to reach out to you, Hannah and Jim, how do they do that? How best to work with you if that's what people on this call want to do?
Jim, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I will put, I'll put my information in the chat, my email address and phone number. And yeah, we'd love to hear from anybody that's interested or is looking for talent from this population.
Thanks, Jim. And similarly, I'm going to drop my company website, email, phone number in the chat. I would love to hear about any challenges that you're facing formally or informally. My door is always open for a chat around a specific instance, and we do have a suite of services at More Than Our Worst. We're a national organization, so we can support any initiative anywhere. And I think us being in community together is important. And so I hope that you all are connected to each other. And we'd love to be connected to you as well. So thank you for the time and the questions and discussion.
Fantastic. And finally, I'm Jeff Wolfsberg. As you all know, I am the program director for Recovery Friendly Workplace. And there are so many similarities and shared values that Hannah and Jim have with our program. Our focus tends to be more on substance abuse and mental health struggles that employees have. But as you went through that list of myths, I said to myself, this is exactly what people feel about with people in recovery. Like, the population is not small in Rhode Island. There's a large group of people that are in recovery. They're not unskilled. They're very skilled. Instead of saying dangerous, I put in place of that unreliable. I hear that a lot, hiring someone that's in recovery. And there is research that shows it's just the opposite, that people that are in recovery, I try to sell recovering people, a lot, because if you are in recovery, people don't realize how hard it is. Like, I'm a person in recovery, and I've been knocked down so many times in my life, but I have gotten up every single time. Don't you want to hire someone like that? So there's a lot of crossover here. So if you want to work with us and we can make these partnerships like Jim and Hannah work together, we would love to hear from you. Some of you people here are already recovery-friendly workplaces like Amos House, but if you are not, please reach out to us. You can find us at recoveryfriendly.ri.gov. But you probably have my email already. A warm welcome, everybody. Big clapping of hands for Hannah and Jim. Everybody, thank you so much. I love learning about this topic. I love learning new things. And thank you for attending. We hope to see you in future monthly webinars. Have a great day, everybody. And a great week. Take care.
So much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Everybody.